The music was playing. Laughter filled the wedding hall. And I stood at the entrance clutching a small gift wrapped in silver paper. My son, David, 29, dressed in his tuxedo, looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm sorry, Mom, you weren't invited. Please go away." That was the moment my heart shattered it inside. A colder fire was born. Before we dive in, if you're listening from your city, country, hit subscribe for more stories like this. Like if you'd stand your ground, comment your move, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The air outside the wedding hall was thick with the scent of fresh roses, but my mind drifted far back to when David was just a little boy. I was 25 when I had him, a single mother working double shifts as a nurse to keep food on the table. I stitched his torn school uniforms late into the night, packed his lunch in old paper bags, and sold my grandmother's ring once to pay for his college tuition. David wasn't just my son, he was my whole world. I remember rainy evenings when the two of us would sit near the window, sipping hot cocoa, while I told him stories about perseverance. He'd rest his head on my shoulder and whisper, "One day, Mom, I'll make you proud." And he did. At least, I thought he did when he graduated with honors in business management. I was the loudest voice in the crowd, clapping until my palms turned red. At his first job interview, I ironed his suit twice, just to make sure he looked perfect. And when he got his first apartment, I gave him the old family photo album. A collection of memories stitched together through hardship and love. That album was a piece of mealware story, but over time, little cracks appeared. Calls grew shorter, visits fewer. Then came Melissa, the woman who would become his bride. She was charming, yes, but there was always a sharpness behind her smile, as though I didn't quite fit into the polished picture she had planned for their lives. Still, I tried. I baked her favorite lemon pie the first time she came over, only to watch her push the plate aside untouched. I ignored the small slights, the missed invitations, the awkward silences, but nothing prepared me for what happened that wedding evening, when all those years of sacrifice were dismissed in a single breath. And as I stood outside that hall, clutching the memory of every sleepless night I'd endured, I knew something had shifted forever. The golden lights of the wedding hall spilled onto the marble steps, and the soft hum of a violin carried through the air. I tightened my grip on the silver-wrapped gift in my hands, a delicate watch I'd saved for months to buy, something I hoped David would treasure as a reminder of me. When I stepped closer to the entrance, the usher glanced at my invitation card and frowned. Before I could explain, David appeared. His tuxedo gleamed, his boutonniere fresh and perfect. But his eyes, they were cold. "Mom," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm sorry, you weren't invited. Please, just go home." I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My chest tightened, my ears rang with the sound of muffled laughter and clinking glasses behind him. I whispered, "David, it's your wedding. I'm your mother. How could I not be here?" Melissa appeared at his side, her hand sliding into his arm. Her smile was polite but sharp. "David, people are watching. We don't need a scene." She didn't even look at me, just tugged him gently, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. A lump formed in my throat as I held out the gift. David shook his head and stepped back. The rejection wasn't just in his words. It was in the way his eyes avoided mine, as though I was invisible. The watch slipped slightly in my trembling hand. I clutched it tighter, the ribbon digging into my palm, and forced myself to turn away before they could see the tears welling in my eyes. That was the moment I knew my son had chosen her over me. But what none of them realized was that I had far more power than they ever imagined. The night after the wedding, I sat alone in my modest living room. The ticking of the wall clock felt louder than usual, echoing in the silence of a home that once held laughter. The silver-wrapped watch sat unopened on the coffee table, its ribbon slightly frayed from where I had clutched it too tightly. Every time I looked at it, a storm brewed in my chest, not of tears this time, but of clarity. If David and Melissa wanted to erase me from their perfect new life, then they would also have to live without the foundation I had built beneath them. They had no idea that the very home they lived in, the apartment Melissa flaunted to her friends as their dream place, was still under my name. Every payment, every paper, every key, they existed because I had made it possible. The first step was simple. The next morning, I called Mr. Green, my lawyer of 15 years. He was in his late 50s, sharp-eyed with a voice that carried both wisdom and warning. He had seen me struggle to buy that property years ago, and he knew every detail of the agreement. Double quotes, Mrs. Turner. He said after I explained everything, You've been more than generous. If they think they can discard you like this, you have every legal right to remind them who holds the keys. That phrase, who holds the key, stuck with me like a spark igniting dry wood. By noon, the locks to their apartment were officially changed. I instructed the building manager, a kind man named Lucas, not to allow anyone in without my permission. When Melissa's expensive delivery packages arrived that afternoon, Lucas signed them and placed them in my storage unit instead. The second step was more personal. I went to the bank and froze the account that funneled automatic mortgage support for David's expenses. I had been quietly helping him cover monthly costs, ensuring he stayed afloat while building his career. Cutting it off wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. The invisible lifeline was gone. As I walked out of the bank, I felt lighter. The grief that had once threatened to drown me was shifting into something sharper, something steadier. This wasn't revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was balance being restored. Finally, I updated my will. Everything I had worked for, the savings, the property, the heirlooms, would no longer default to David. Instead, I redirected them to a local children's foundation that supported single mothers, the very kind of women I once had been. The act wasn't just defiance, it was liberation. Later that evening, I sat with Mr. Green in his office, signing the final set of documents. The room smelled faintly of leather and ink, the air heavy with quiet finality. He slid the last paper across the desk, and as my pen scratched against it, I felt my resolve settle. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. I nodded. He made his choice. Now I'm making mine. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not with joy, but with the steel of someone who had taken back her voice. But Melissa wasn't the kind of woman to accept defeat quietly. Their pushback was coming, and I was ready for it. 3 days passed before the first phone call came. My screen lit up with David's name, 30 missed calls in a row. When I finally answered, his voice cracked with forced emotion. "Mom, please. Melissa and we didn't mean it like that. You showing up at the wedding, it just wasn't the right time. We were under pressure. Please, don't be like this." His words were carefully chosen, dripping with guilt, but I could hear Melissa's whispering in the background, feeding him lines. My jaw tightened as I stared at the watch on the coffee table, still unopened. "David," I said slowly, "you made your choice in front of the world. Now you'll live with it." I hung up before he could reply. The next day, Melissa herself showed up at my door. She wore a black dress, pearls around her neck. Her face painted with a sweetness that looked artificial under the morning sun. She carried a bouquet of lilies, their perfume filling the hallway. "Mrs. Turner," she began, her tone soft, "I know we got off on the wrong foot. I want us to be a family. Can we talk?" Her eyes darted toward the hallway camera I had installed, wanted witnesses to her performance. I almost laughed. Setting the flowers on the counter, I replied, "Melissa, lilies are funeral flowers. Maybe that's fitting." Her smile faltered. For a moment, the mask slipped, revealing the steel underneath. She left without another word, the lilies abandoned like her empty apology. The third attempt was the boldest. David and Melissa invited me to a family dinner, supposedly to reconcile. But when I arrived at the restaurant, it wasn't just them waiting, it was Melissa's lawyer, seated smugly at the table. "Mrs. Turner," the lawyer began, sliding a folder across the table, "my clients believe they are entitled to certain assets. Given the years of familial support and implied guardianship." The word entitled made my blood run cold. I flipped open the folder. Inside was a list of demands: monthly financial support, property rights, even access to my savings. I looked up to see Melissa watching me like a predator who thought she had already won. I closed the folder calmly, slid it back across the table, and said, "Entitlement doesn't erase abandonment. You'll get nothing." Gasps rippled from nearby tables. The confrontation had become a spectacle. People were watching, whispering. Melissa's cheeks flushed red, her hand tightening around her wineglass until I thought it might shatter. David leaned forward desperately. "Mom, please, don't do this. We just want what's fair." I met his eyes, my voice steady. "Fair would have been inviting me to your wedding. Fair would have been respect. You chose humiliation instead." I stood, placing a single folded envelope on the table, the updated will's acknowledgement, notarized and sealed. "This is all you'll ever see of my estate. Read it and weep." As I walked out of the restaurant, the weight of eyes followed me. For the first time, I didn't feel small or unwanted, I felt powerful. But Melissa wasn't finished, she had one last card to play. What she didn't realize was that my ally had been waiting in the shadows for this exact moment. The town courthouse was buzzing that morning, sunlight streaming through tall arched windows as people shuffled into the wooden benches. My ally, Mr. Grant Parker, my late husband's longtime lawyer and family friend, stood beside me. At 62, with his sharp suits and sharper mind, he carried the aura of a man who never lost a case. Melissa and David walked in together, their lawyer trailing behind them. Melissa was dressed in an elegant navy dress, pearls at her neck, a getaway's trying to project sophistication. But her eyes betrayed her, darting nervously around the room as whispers followed her entrance. The judge called the case. Turner estate dispute. Melissa's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth. Your Honor, my clients, David and Melissa Turner, were unfairly excluded from Mrs. Turner's estate. They have been dependent on her financial support, and by implied guardianship, they are entitled to continued access. The words made the audience stir. A few people muttered, others leaned closer to listen. Mr. Parker rose calmly, sliding a thick folder onto the desk. Your Honor, he began, his voice strong and unshakable. The facts speak otherwise. David Turner abandoned his mother years ago, and Melissa explicitly excluded her from the most important day of her son's life, their wedding. We have evidence of both disregard and exploitation attempts. He opened the folder and pulled out a video recording. The court screen flickered to life. There, in high definition, was David at the wedding entrance, looking his mother in the eye and saying the words, "I'm sorry, you weren't invited. Please, just go home." Gasps filled the room. Melissa's face drained of color as the audience turned to look at them. Then came the second piece of evidence assigned. Notarized will that clearly stated the estate, including properties and investments, was secured in my name with no obligation to David or Melissa. Melissa shot to her feet, her voice shrill. This isn't fair. She's manipulating all of you. She's just bitter because she wasn't invited to the wedding. The judge banged his gavel, silencing her outburst. All eyes in the room fixed on me as I rose, my voice steady but cutting through the heavy silence. You talk about fairness, Melissa, I said, locking eyes with her. Fairness would have been treating me like family. Instead, you shut me out, in front of hundreds of people, as though I was nothing. But you forgot one thing: I built the ground you're standing on. Without me, you have nothing. David's face crumpled with shame. Melissa tried to tug him back, whispering furiously. But he wouldn't meet my gaze. The judge delivered the verdict swiftly. All claims by the plaintiffs are dismissed. Mrs. Turner retains sole control of her estate. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Melissa's lawyer packed up silently, his lips tight with defeat, as the room emptied. Melissa finally lost the mask. She spun toward me, venom in her eyes. You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you're alone, and you always will be. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she and David could hear. No, Melissa, I'm free. There's a difference. With that, I slid the courthouse keys into my bag, gathered my papers, and walked out into the bright sunlight. Behind me, whispers swirled through the crowd, and Melissa stood frozen, her social mask shattered, her humiliation irreversible. For the first time in years, my steps felt light. But victory didn't erase the scars, it only revealed who truly stood by me. And the months that followed showed exactly who I could count on. It has been 6 months since that day in court, and life has shifted in ways I never imagined. The morning sun filters through the lace curtains of my living room now, spilling golden light across the wooden floors. My small but warm house, one I chose intentionally away from the chaos, is filled with peace. There's no more tension pressing against the walls, no more footsteps that carry unspoken judgment. Instead, I wake up to quiet, fresh air, and the smell of brewed coffee. Since the verdict, Melissa has been a shadow of the woman who once strutted into every room like she owned it. Word around town is that she tried to maintain her facade. But once the video from the courthouse leaked online thanks to someone in the audience, her reputation crumbled. Neighbors whispered, business contacts pulled away, and the very friends she used to boast to now crossed the street to avoid her. The pearls she wore so proudly no longer carried meaning. David, my son. That's the part that aches the most. After the courthouse humiliation, he tried to call me several times. His voice messages were shaky, filled with apologies that sounded more like guilt than love. Mom, I didn't know she'd take it this far. Please, can we meet? but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Every time I replayed the memory of him at the wedding door, coldly telling me I wasn't invited, my chest tightened. He chose her once, and sometimes, a single choice changes everything. My ally, Mr. Parker, became more than just a lawyer. In those months, he became a true friend. He often stops by with files or simply a bottle of wine, reminding me that justice, though not always swift, does arrive when you stay patient. His sharp advice and calm presence kept me steady when emotions threatened to consume me. I also began volunteering at the local community center. I teach young people how to manage money, open savings accounts, and protect themselves legally. I realized that the knowledge I fought for, how to stand my ground, how to guard my assets, shouldn't die with me. It should empower others. That became my new purpose, a flame that burned brighter than revenge ever could. One afternoon, while sorting through some papers, I found the small silver-wrapped gift I had carried to David's wedding, the one I was never allowed to give him. It was a framed photograph of us on his 10th birthday, his arms wrapped tightly around me, frosting smudged on his cheeks. For a long moment, I stared at it, my throat tight. Then, with a steady hand, I placed it back in the box and locked it away. Some memories belong to the past, no matter how sweet they once were. As for Melissa, the last I heard, she had moved back to her sister's cramped apartment after her debts piled up. The grand house, the expensive dresses, the social circles, they all slipped through her fingers like sand. Her downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, drawn out, and far more painful than anything I could have orchestrated. That, perhaps, was her true punishment. I, on the other hand, have found a strange freedom in solitude. For the first time in decades, I am not tied to anyone's expectations. I cook what I want, read until midnight if I feel like it, and walk along the beach at sunrise with no one questioning where I've been. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of crimson, I stood at the porch and whispered to myself, when you stop paying for love, you finally see who truly loves you. It wasn't bitterness anymore, it was clarity, and with that vow, I closed the chapter on David and Melissa, not with anger, but with acceptance. The camera lingers on me standing at the porch, sunset fading into night, a faint smile on my face, as I finally step back inside, shutting the door softly behind me. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like and share it. In the comments, tell me what topic you'd like the next story on, and rate this one out of 10.